It's now my pleasure to introduce Tom Steyer, Bakari Sellers, and Teresa Tomlinson. Tom, I'm going to give you the floor.
Well, thank you very much for coming. Really looking forward to this. I'm very interested in hearing what is on your mind and any questions you have. I thought I'd start by just doing a very short description of where we stand in terms of impeachment, and then turn it over to Teresa and Bakari. So let me just say this. It's a serious issue to impeach the President of the United States. It is something that we take very seriously and solemnly, but at the same time, it is also the most important issue in the United States right now, because what this President and this administration do touches each of us and touches virtually every issue that we're dealing with as a country. So we do take it seriously. When we think about it in two simple ways. One, has he met the criterion to be impeached? And we got 58 constitutional scholars to come in and give us their opinion that basically this is a laydown from the standpoint of meeting the criteria to be impeached. And if you want, you can go on our website, needtoimpeach.com, and we put on a 2-hour discussion with constitutional scholars to the extent that you want to go back to high school and remember civics class. It is on there in detail, and when it's over, you'll think, my goodness, that is a laydown. And the second question is about urgency. How important is it for us to get rid of this president as soon as possible? And one of the things that we did to try and address that was to speak, believe it or not, to psychiatrists. Over 120 psychiatrists came together to say this president is emotionally troubled and deteriorating. And once again, we did a 2-hour symposium with 5 of those psychiatrists, including 2 who vet service people right up to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who have access to nuclear material and the nuclear codes. One of those, it was actually a man in this case, had vetted 1,200 service people for the appropriateness of their handling nuclear weapons. And he said there is absolutely no chance that this president would be given the right to handle nuclear weapons as part of the military. For someone who's been involved with numerous incidents of violence towards women, who's been involved in numerous questions about telling the truth, there is absolutely no chance, who has said, dangerous and overblown statements about his own importance. There is no chance that he would ever get within 1 million miles of nuclear weapons if he were in the American military. But the fact is, there's only one person in the United States who gets access to the nuclear codes without being vetted for approval on an emotional and psychiatric basis, and it's the President of the United States, strangely enough. Let me say this. We don't view this as a partisan issue. We view this as a question of patriotism, about protection of our democracy, protection of our country, and protection of the safety and health of Americans. We know for sure that if this president is impeached and removed from office, that he will be replaced by a Republican, most likely a conservative Republican from Indiana. We know that. And we also know that for this to happen, Republicans have to vote for it. So when we really think about what's going on here, we see this, and this is a reflection of what we're doing here tonight and what we've been doing for the last 5 months. This is actually a question before the American people. The elected officials, I understand the rules about impeachment and then the trial in the Senate. But the fact of the matter is, no elected officials are going to do that unless they believe that the American people insist on it, which is why we've been going directly to Americans, trying to get people to sign our petition, trying to organize that voice so that elected officials can see how many people actually believe that we have a dangerous, reckless, and lawless president, which is what I believe we have. So when we think about this, we really see this as a conversation amongst American citizens where, in fact, we started in one place on October 20th, and our belief was that every single day after we started our petition drive on October 20th, there would be further evidence that would come out that this president was dangerous, reckless, and lawless. And if you just think back through the last week,
it's only Monday.
Honestly, it's Monday. It's Monday. But, I came out of, I'll just say this and then we should move on, but I was in a meeting last Friday for 1 hour from 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. with three co-workers back in California. And at the end of that meeting, we came out, and during that 1 hour, it turned out that Michael Cohen was keeping tapes of his conversations, that the doorman at Trump Tower was claiming that Mr. Trump had an out-of-wedlock child, and that there was a headline from the BBC, from the British Broadcasting Company, saying, "Are we starting World War III?" 1 hour. And I went home, and I was having dinner with my wife and my 24-year-old son. And I said, you can't believe it, 1 hour, 3 things like this, 1 hour. And my son Henry said, "Dad, I don't think it's funny. I don't even want to talk about it anymore. I don't want to hear about this president one more time at the dinner table. I don't think World War III is a joke." And I realized that my son was actually right. We're so used to this barrage of unacceptable news. We're so used to every day the former head of the FBI calling the president morally unfit. We're so used to I always say there's never one cockroach. Well, every day the cockroaches are coming out of our refrigerator. And every day we see it, and now we're becoming inured to the idea that our democracy is going to be reduced, it's going to be attacked, it's going to be lessened on a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly basis, which we shouldn't accept. So I look at this as the American people taking the response that the founders gave us in the Constitution if we have a lawless, dangerous president, taking the power back into our hands and insisting that we get back to the kind of democracy that this country was organized around and that which we have to insist on or we're not going to have.
Thank you. Teresa, we'd love to hear some remarks from you as well.
Well, thank you. Well, thank you, Carla, and thank you, Tom, for coming to Atlanta. Welcome. And Bakari, it's good to be here with you, too, and to see this great crowd. Tom said something that's so very true. This isn't a partisan issue. If you all were watching the news this weekend, you saw that there's now an organization called Republicans for the Rule of Law. And that's really what this is about. The tool of impeachment is very much about the rule of law. If you think that this discussion about need to impeach is a strategy to win more House seats for Democrats or to win more Senate seats for Democrats, then you're profoundly mistaken. And I think that that's something that our good friends in the media need to hear loud and clear, but we all need to ruminate on too. There may be a lot of things that we don't like about Donald Trump. Certainly his environmental policies are outrageous, his educational policies are outrageous, the people he's put in place are outrageous. Those are political issues. Those are the things we line up to vote for. What we're talking about here are fundamental abuses of power. What we're talking about here is the rule of law. And actually the need to impeach movement is precisely what was intended by the Constitution. Our founding fathers wrote about this issue a great deal. There's 4 or 5 Federalist Papers on this very subject. It's referred to in many, many others. And when you read those, when you understand the history, that this goes back, of course, to even England. When you understand the history, this was meant to supplement and be a necessary adjunct to elections. Why? Because it had to be urgent. You had to mitigate the harm of somebody in an executive position abusing power, abusing the rule of law. Can't wait 2 more years, can't wait 3 more years. And so that's why this is so critically important. That's with some of the type of allegations we've been talking about in the press. This is, as Gerald Ford said, anything that you can get a majority in the House of Representatives for an article of impeachment, that is an act that constitutes impeachment. But the truth is there's actually a little broader standard on the one hand, which is anything that abuses the power of law, any action that is devoid of honor. We've had a few of those. But most specifically, anything that abuses the power of law that flows from the office of the presidency most certainly constitutes a ground for impeachment. There are a few quick points that I wanted to make. The Founding Fathers talk about the tool of impeachment as being a, quote, constant threat. And they didn't mean by that we were to have an unstable government, that we were to have volatility built into our government. They talk about it as if the oath of office, they say the oath of office, the threat of reputation being destroyed, the threat of your honor being called into question, those are all tools to hope that you behave in an honorable manner as President of the United States. But the tool of impeachment is, quote, essential, is fundamental to ensuring good behavior of an executive, and they must know that it hangs over their head with every one of the very important fiduciary duties that they have. I'll say this, we have our fellow citizens that are conservatives tell us all the time that they have to arm themselves with weapons of war in case they're faced with tyranny. Well, that's actually inaccurate. The Founding Fathers didn't want there to be constant insurrection. They actually allowed for a way to handle tyranny and authoritarianism and other abuses of power through the impeachment mechanism. I'll say this too, some pretty smart folks, they actually anticipated the inaction of the legislature when it was held by the same party as the executive. The same thing we're going through now. And I didn't bring it to read it out loud to bore everybody to death, but you go to Federalist number 66, the very last paragraph, and what you will find is they say that eventually you will win their hearts and minds through efforts such as need to impeach by showing them that their self-interest, meaning their office, is in peril if they don't vote to punish the author of their disgrace. That's the quote. If they don't vote to punish the author of their disgrace. So if there is indeed evidence of corruption, there is indeed abuse of power flowing from the office of the presidency, and elected fiduciaries stand and do nothing, that is their, quote, mismanagement and disgrace. And at some point their self-interest will be initiated and they will vote to punish the author of their disgrace. So Tom, thank you for this important movement. And really it just reflects the tools that we were provided 230 years ago.
Thank you, Teresa. Bakari, you're up.
Well, yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm from the big city of Denmark, South Carolina, where we have 3 stoplights and a blinking light. And I always say that my mom and dad taught me the 2 most important words in the English language were the words thank you. And they're not nearly said enough. So Tom and Madam Mayor, thank you both for being here. Everyone, you could have been somewhere else on Monday night, especially as the temperature drops. We seem to have 3 seasons in a matter of 3 days. But you all are here, so thank you for being here. I actually approach this issue slightly different. And the reason being is I think that my role on CNN, I got a chance to see the ebbs and flows of the political process unlike anything that I've ever had the ability to see before. I was fortunate enough in June 13, 2006 to be elected to the South Carolina General Assembly when I was 21 years old. And I served for nearly a decade in the General Assembly and ran statewide in South Carolina. And so I felt as if I had some grasp of the American political system, having been able to serve in what was the highest honor of my life. But I don't know if I have as much faith as you two in changing hearts, per se. I know that the American public, 60% of those thought that Donald Trump didn't have the temperament to be president. Over 60% thought that he didn't have the morals or ethics to be president. And yet many of those still voted for him to be president of the United States anyway. So with that in mind, I think that we have to change the fundamental dynamics on which we play the game. And I think that we can talk about why we're so hyper-partisan. I think that has to do, and I hope that, need to impeach will then continue to move forward, and we can talk about things like redistricting and the census and all of those other things that play in this vast thing that we call democracy. But I sit at home every night with my 12-year-old daughter and my wife, and we're more blessed than we deserve. And I think about all of those who may not have those blessings or those fortunes. I think about all of those who are wondering how to make ends meet, how to pay the electric bill, how to get their grandparents their prescription drugs, and also the destruction they see every day coming from 1600 Pennsylvania of what they love and what they believe to be democracy, which people go out and fight for every single day. And so, yeah, I think that we have to take it to the American public, and I think that we have to be sure that we're doing things like registering voters. I think we have to be educating them on the electoral process. We have to be engaged, not just around election time, but every single day. And we have to make sure that we're moving people from their kitchen tables to the ballot box. Because I'm not sure with the dynamics that are set forth before us today that we can actually get to the goal of having new executive leadership. But I do think that under need to impeach, we can definitely get there. And I think that one of the things we have to do is change the dynamics by which we play the game. And so I look forward to having a new House of Representatives in November. And I know this isn't a partisan ideal. I just don't have as much faith in the dynamics in which they stand today. And I think that we can begin to have discussions about how 2018 looks, because I do think that for the first time, in my opinion, recently I literally thought that we were on the brink of a constitutional crisis. And I think that for me to get to that point says a lot, but I also think that there are a lot of Americans who are at that point, who can see the crisis sees in front of them. And I think that we have to have an organized plan and goal, but we also have to give everyday voters and Americans the tools by which we can get to this overall goal, which is changing the executive leadership. So with that, I'll end where I began, which is to simply say thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So before I open up questions to the audience, I have one for the panel. What do each of you see as the way forward from here? I'll start with Tom and then Teresa, Bakari.
Sure.
Way forward in terms of this campaign, or way forward in a more general sense?
In the more general sense.
So let me respond quickly to what Bakari put on the table, which has to do with our overall political system. The organization that I founded, Next Gen America,
Doing great work.
is a grassroots organization. And our basic belief is that the solution to our problems is more democracy, broader democracy, and more inclusive democracy. And we see the Need to Impeach campaign as an effort towards direct democracy, putting power back into the hands of people. And along with that effort, we are also we are probably the largest group in the United States in terms of registering, engaging, and empowering young voters, people under 35, who are the largest age group in America, the most diverse age group in America, the most progressive age group in America, and participate in our elections at approximately half the rate of other American citizens. So we do a lot of different kinds of grassroots, but probably the single biggest effort we have is to reach out to those young voters and make sure that, in fact, they are aware of the power that is in their hands to change our country and to change the world. But so the first thing I'd say is, to me, this campaign is part of an effort to create the kind of broad, human-based democracy that we were organized to over 200 years ago to have. But the second thing I'd say is this, and I think that Mr. Trump is a byproduct of the fact that we do not have a common vision, a positive common vision of where we're trying to take the United States towards a just, inclusive, and prosperous country in the way that we've had in the past. So that when we get up in the morning, Americans don't have a sense of what it is that we're trying to achieve. Not that we have it, but that we understand it. So when I look at politics today in the United States, I see stale ideas from the 1930s combating stale ideas from the 1980s. And neither of them are actually addressing the absolutely critical issues in front of us. And that's why in 2016, the two big winners were Donald Trump, who's not a Republican, and Bernie Sanders, who's not a Democrat. And when I look out at what we're missing, it's the kind of things, I mean, I know that Georgia did not do Medicaid expansion. Let me say this. I believe that health care is a right for every American. And the only issue we should be discussing is how to deliver it in the most effective and cost-effective way. I believe that education from pre-K through college is a right in the 21st century. I was talking to people earlier about environmental issues in Georgia. I believe Americans have an absolute right to clean air and clean water. It's not a fancy thing. That is not a luxury. If your child has asthma, having clean air is not a luxury. If your parent is poisoned and going to die early, their life is not a luxury. And I look at what's going on in the United States right now and the way that working people are being disadvantaged for the sake of big corporations and the very richest Americans, and it's absolutely wrong and antithetical to the country that we set out to be. So when I look at the country we're in, and I also believe this administration is as openly racist an administration as has existed in my entire life. And these are not complicated ideas, but it's time for us to look forward and have a vision of how we can not just compete in the 21st century, but how we can succeed together in the 21st century and realize that we're going to succeed when we support and invest in individual Americans so they can succeed. That will be our success. And it's easy to tell because when you look at the budget, look and see, the question is follow the money. Look and see if we're taking the money to invest in the health, productivity, education, training, and success of American people, or we're putting it into the kind of, to my mind, unjust but also outmoded, inefficient, and stupid idea that a country is going to be great based on how the size of its army is, on how big its police force is, how big their prisons are. The fact of the matter is, we're in a new world. And it's time for us to recognize that successful countries in the 21st century, it's global, it's driven by information technology. We need to invest in the American people individually and by community so that we can succeed together. And when we see that, we're going to get over this. We're having a huge emotional, moral problem as a country. That's what my son was telling me. I don't even like to talk about it, Dad. We have to be in a place where when you guys get up in the morning and other Americans get up in the morning, they think we're going to a better place. We're the leader country we were always designed to be. The American experiment is alive and well.
So Carla said, where do we go from here? I think Tom and I are very well aligned on all of the policy issues, education, environment, healthcare, and so forth. None of those would be grounds for impeachment, or we would have impeached George Bush, or we would have impeached, I mean, we had a whole list of folks, but that's not the way it works. And I think sometimes we do ourselves a disservice when we care about this issue of need to impeach and talking about it in our political terms first. I think we need to, again, get back to the fact that we're talking about the rule of law and a violation of the rule of law. I will tell you, I ran into a wonderful, a solid partisan, a true liberal on the way here, and I told him where I was going, and he said, oh gosh, I hope they don't impeach Donald Trump. He's allowing us to raise so much money. We're getting all these great candidates to run. We're going to win back the House. If he's on the ballot in 2020, we're going to get the White House. I mean, he was just so excited about keeping Donald Trump in office. And I understand that partisan fervor. I really do. And it's the lawyer in me. I admit it. But the fact of the matter is, you cannot allow an executive who shows a propensity to violate the rule of law they've been entrusted to follow, that our very essence as a nation rests upon, to serve one day more than our process allows. And that's why I'm here tonight, is because that's what I'm so critically concerned about. So let me be specific. We have specific evidence of the undermining of the rule of law and obstruction of justice evidence that has come forward. Soon we'll have Robert Mueller's report, if the press is to be believed, which we'll issue to Congress. And that's based on several things that we know that have been reported: the firing of Comey, the trumped-up Trump Tower meeting, the report or statement, the harassment of Jeff Sessions, the constant talking and broadcasting of pardons to people who are witnesses in current criminal federal investigation. So you have a violation of the rule of law with obstruction of justice. You also have the undermining of our sacred election process with what we just know in the public so far and what's been in charging documents. Papadopoulos being involved with knowing about stolen emails and knowing about their political use. You've got Carter Page, Manafort, and the NRA all working with foreign agents for the benefit of a particular candidate. We have emails saying, hey, I'm going to talk to the Kremlin about getting our boy elected. Now, if all those dots get connected, you also have the odd timing of Trump's speeches with this knowing stolen emails that the general public weren't aware of. If those dots get connected, and there is indeed proof, as there appears to be, of the undermining of our sacred elections process, that is grounds for impeachment that goes to the very essence of this government. The last thing I would say, and it's not talked about enough, is really an abuse of power flowing from the office and the personal enrichment that's coming from it. And I would say that could most broadly be described as the sale of our foreign policy for personal favor. We saw it first with the change of the Republican platform as it related to Ukraine and the funding of folks in Ukraine. And that was so that it appears that Manafort could have debt relief. And it appears also that may have been done for Trump Hotel favor, right? And then you go down to this back channel business discussed in the Seychelles, discussed by Jared Kushner. The back channel, if in fact that is shown in this report, that the evidence does exist as we have seen in the media, that shows a purposeful intent to circumvent our intelligence systems and the Gang of Eight. You all know what the Gang of Eight is. It's representatives and senators who are the check on the executive's authority related to acts of war, that they have certain Article 2 powers to initiate. And so that type of circumvention to our checks and balances is an undermining of the rule of law in this country. I could go on and I won't because I know your time is precious. But those types of things are troubling, and they're exactly what the Founding Fathers talked about when they said We're not going to put all these restraints of the judiciary in a typical criminal prosecution with juries and indictment papers and so forth, because if indeed you have such a thing, you've got to move, and you've got to move quickly to mitigate the risk of harm to the country. And so for me, it's not political. If this was a Democrat and independent doing the same type of thing, I would be right up here. Again, it may be because I'm a lawyer, but I'm telling you, this is the boldest threat of executive abuse of power I think we've ever seen.
So, I think it's a great question. I always ask people, where do we go from here? It's a part of my spiel. I like to ask people, how far have we come and where do we go from here? I think those are the two most important questions anyone can ask themselves, whether or not on a personal journey or political journey or what have you. So I think tangibly, one of the things that we have to examine are the pitfalls of kind of where we are. You talked about the Mueller report. Well, see, the Mueller report doesn't necessarily have to be public. The Mueller report goes to Rod Rosenstein, who then will make a decision about whether or not he is going to give it to Congress or not. Something of this great import, you would think that he would give it to Congress and it would be public, but we don't know the answer to that. What's in the report? I mean, it could say that the president went to Vladimir Putin's home and gave him $10 for the emails. We see that it's there, but then there's a question about whether or not you can actually indict a sitting president. No one knows. That's an open legal question. No one knows the answer to that question. And so moments like this are so important. Like where we are today is so important because the only thing that we really have control over right now, the only thing that we can reach out and touch is the way that we play our role in this democracy, right? Is what we do by holding our elected officials accountable. That's why Need to Impeach is so amazing, because this is about holding people accountable for the sacred right to uphold our everyday democracy. Now, let me disavow you of this notion, right? Racism didn't start with Donald Trump, okay? Like people have this really funky belief that all of a sudden Donald Trump got elected and then, oh my God, there's racism. Nah, let me just tell you, the black person on stage, y'all are misguided if that's a thought, okay? So no, that's not the case at all. We've had systems of oppression in this country. Flint, Michigan doesn't happen in Dana Point Beach, California, right? It just simply doesn't. Kids in this country are punished because of the zip code that they're born into every single day. Our kids can't compete in an economy that I now believe is fundamentally flat. I think the world is flat. Friedman wrote it best, because kids are now not just competing with other kids who graduate from Southwest DeKalb or Redan. They're now competing with kids who graduated in the UAE and London. And we're putting our kids at a fundamental disadvantage because we don't give them the resources to compete. We have rural hospitals which are shutting down all throughout the country because we don't do things like expanding Medicaid, because we don't have a healthcare system which focuses on efficient care where we need it most, right? So that is nothing new, right? That's nothing new. But the reason that we're here today is not necessarily because of those policy ideals, but because of something along with those things. The fate of our democracy is being just shredded right before our eyes. And so that's why we're here. It's because we believe that people fought for what is the greater good, to be a part of something larger than themselves. And we're seeing that just eroded because of kleptocracy, because of nepotism, because of bigotry, because of selfishness, because of the lack of patriotism. More people care about, and it's amazing the way that he's able to manipulate, more people are caring about Colin Kaepernick and Eric Reed kneeling at the national anthem, right, and calling them unpatriotic than actually caring about holding up the sanctity of law and the rule of law. That is what, who's the real patriot there? Someone who speaks out against injustice, or someone who literally shreds the values of the Constitution day in and day out. And so I think that sometimes we get a little bit off kilter, we get a little bit off focus, because Donald Trump happens to help us sensationalize a lot. There's a lot there, right? But if we focus on what Tom is saying and what you're saying so eloquently, is that the rule of law has just been literally just peeled apart and destroyed day in and day out. And it doesn't seem as if people have any courage to stand up and say anything about it.
Thank you. Thank you, panel. So we would now like to open up our discussion to questions from the audience. My colleagues will be running mics in both rows. And if you could please keep your questions to about 30 seconds. Give us your name and the city you're from, please.
And they have to be questions, right?
Yes, they do need to be questions.
Thank you so much, all three of you, for being here and giving your time and energy for this. My question is kind of, what can I do in the path going forward? What I've heard so far, to clarify, is I can talk to my representatives to insist on impeachment. What can I do that would actually move this forward? And thank you for that.
So that seems like a setup, but it wasn't. We actually have cards to try here printed out to try and answer a simple question about different ways to be more involved besides just signing the petition and voting. And so there are 4 ways to be more involved with need to impeach, and there are 4 actions to take in your community. So they involve things like registering 3 friends to vote, signing up to volunteer, sharing content on Facebook and Twitter, and then it gets into actions within your community. Write a letter to the editor of your local paper, find a local candidate you believe in, get to know your members of Congress. So these are available on the way out because it's a simple way of saying, and actually I think we're trying to make all of these actions simpler and less onerous. Because our goal is a broader democracy, which doesn't just mean showing up on election day and participating at the polls, although it does mean that. But it means more than that a democracy isn't just a once every 2-year event, it's actually participating in the interim. And so on your way out, if you're wondering what to do, here is we printed out, we thought about it, and came up with a simple checklist so everyone can have something to do.
And I would just add, if I can, make sure that if you're calling your elected representative to talk about impeachment, that you keep it to some of the things that I mentioned and not all the other sins and shortcomings of Donald Trump, because you need to help arm them with the power they need when given the Mueller report and what we believe is going to come out, they're going to need to cast a vote. And they're going to need more than just his sins and shortcomings, his policy failures, and that's the obstruction of justice, rule of law, the undermining of the election system, and the abuse of power, and the quid pro quo of the personal enrichment.
Right here. Right. Yeah.
Thank you. I'd like to add my thanks to all of you for coming tonight. My name is Paul Neisel. I'm from Sandy Springs, Georgia. I'm interested in your response to James Comey's answer to George Stephanopoulos' question of last evening, should Donald Trump be impeached, to which James Comey said no.
Yeah. Can I take that?
Go ahead, Teresa.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I almost mentioned that, so thank you for asking. Certainly he's a very bright man, a very accomplished man, but I disagree with him wholeheartedly. What he's talking about is a pure democracy. And in a pure democracy, you must suffer through until the next election. But our founding fathers provided differently, and that was that we would have a representative democracy, a republic. And that republic provides that we have put people in office to step in so we don't have to suffer through 4 years of anybody abusing the rule of law in the executive position. And so I would say that he was just a little off there. And you see that often, even with, it's not a matter of education or intelligence. I mean, you see very bright people lapsing into talking about America as if it's a pure democracy. Like, hey, why don't we vote on the holdings of cases that judges have before them? Well, it's because it's not the way it works here. And so anyway, I would say he's just a little off. He was talking about pure democracy, not a republic.
I also think, I don't know if he was talking about a pure democracy per se. I also think that some people are just begging patience. I think that some people are saying, well, let's see what's in the Mueller report. I think some people are saying, we have this, we have conjecture, we have thoughts, we have ideas, we have what's in the major news, in the public news square. And some people are simply saying, let's wait for that other shoe to drop. Let's actually evaluate all the facts we have before us. And I think it's okay to give those people patience. That doesn't mean we have to stop our efforts. That doesn't mean that we have to slow down at all. But that does mean that we need to mark them down, like, you know, when you knock on doors and you have 1s, 2s, and 3s. Well, if you all knock on doors during this election cycle, you have like voters who were with you, voters who were maybes, voters who were like, hell no, stop knocking on my door, right? And then you circle those maybes, right? And so I think that there are a lot of people who fall into that maybe. There are also a lot of squishy Republicans who fall into that maybe, who just want to see what this report says, want to see what happens in the Southern District of New York, and we have to give them that space, but give them the tools to get to where we want them to be.
Well, can I make one point here too? And that's this. Everyone is waiting for the Mueller report. But in a normal political process, we would be getting investigations through the Senate committees and through the House committees.
Well, we're still waiting on a Senate committee.
But truthfully, for those of you who are old enough, which looks like there's some people besides me who went through Watergate, the Senate Watergate Committee, run by Senator Sam Ervin, was one of the all-time great performances by the United States Senate, where they brought every single person up and did in front of the American people on live TV a political question of the Nixon White House. And frankly, it was a chance to see, wow, he's a crook, and he's a crook, and by gosh, he's a crook. And by the time it was over, America had decided that we were going to get rid of that president. And what's happened in this case, and Bakari's, in my mind, more of an optimist than I am, which is this: we've seen those committees get sidelined. That's why Devin Nunes matters. Yeah. Devin Nunes decided that we're not doing oversight of this president for partisan reasons. And so the reason that Mueller matters is he is not subject at this point to political oversight, which is why the president is so desperate to stop him. Yeah. So really, the reason that impeachment is so important is because it's the last tool we have. That we don't have, we're going to get to the election on November 6th, but the truth of the matter is, to protect our democracy, the founders gave us this one tool, and people are deciding to try and push that tool. Don't be hasty, don't be urgent, don't look at the evidence, let's wait. But the fact is, as Teresa says, we have more than enough evidence right now, and we want the Mueller report to come out. We want more evidence, but the fact of the matter is, it's a lay down right now on both what Teresa said and some other things too.
Yeah. And I think that's why the need to impeach is so important. And I too, I think as a country we've decided we're going to wait on the Mueller report. And I got to tell you, anybody else out there as a lawyer, they are moving as fast as I have ever seen folks with this type of a complex criminal investigation going. They are moving at light speed for something like this. And so I think we may see something sooner. And even if they just come forward with the report on obstruction, that certainly could be enough to start impeachment proceedings. But why need to impeach is so important, as Tom was saying, is because, as our founding fathers said, they need to feel, the House of Representatives, the senators need to feel the pressure of their constituency saying, we understand the difference between policy and elections and not liking necessarily all that he's doing and his sins and shortcomings, and the difference between the violation of the rule of law and abuse of power. And that's why I hope you will take some of the things we've been talking about today and call your elected officials and let them know that you know the difference and you're watching. And that will actually end up bolstering and strengthening their spine whether it's corruption or whatever is revealed is presented to them, and as they said, they will vote to punish the author of their disgrace.
Lady in the black over here. Yes.
I kind of figured you'd come to me, and I'm glad you did, because I'm about to leave. It's like every other meeting I go to. We're the OG posse, and I'm sick of seeing us, and it's what you said earlier, and it's quite true. I've been black all my life, and it's nothing but racist America brought you to this point. So Donald Trump is what you deserve. Now here's your truth. If you want America to change, you better wake up. Your sons and daughters with pink hair, blue hair, and yeah, it's a question in there, but he also said he came to hear us. So I'm speaking. Pink and blue hair, ask yourselves, are they listening to you? Are you relevant? Why is it black men in Atlanta, I'm a native, have dropped out of high school at 50%? Do you hear me? Because they learn. We make our money no matter who's in the White House. We don't give a flying flick. You haven't treated us with welcome arms ever. So hint, black women get it. We're trying. But see, black men, that's who you better wake up to, because they're hanging with your sons and daughters. And they've learned from reality TV, make the money. Ask Cardi B. make that money. They don't care about impeaching him. He's the biggest reality star they have. He made that money. 19% of black men voted for him.
No.
Do you understand where this is
Went
going?
like 19.
Until we get to the reality of old philosophies will not affect this new generation. You're going to have to come to them about money. How do they make that money? Really listen to them, because that's all they care about. We will be dead. They will be running this country, and if you don't think they're going to put another Donald Trump in, you're fooling yourself. You're fooling yourself. My question, give me somebody in the Democratic Party to vote for.
I can't help you with that one. I hope we got 30 people to run, so that's a long way away. I actually disagree with your premise, though. Listen, in 2024, 49% of the electorate in this country are going to be millennials and Generation Z. Generation Z, which is the generation after us, is actually the most diverse generation this country's ever seen. So in saying all of that, I'm a millennial, I'm 33 years old, I was born in 1984. I'm a product of I like to refer to myself as a child of the Civil Rights Movement. My dad was one of the founding members of SNCC. But even more importantly, my generation and the generation after us, they're not a make that money generation. In fact, Tom, one of the things that I hope you see is, and understand, and I hope everyone in here understands, is that we are a new protest generation. Not only do you have the Occupy Wall Streets, not only do you have the gun controls, but you have the Black Lives Matter. I mean, we are one of the more socially conscious generations that we've had probably since the 60s. So your question's actually right, though, in that how do you harness this? How do you harness this new generation? How do you speak to this new generation about an issue like impeachment? Because she's right. We're not talking about impeachment. You know, my generation's out here, we're talking about gun control. Generation Z, it's phenomenal. They went from, we were worried about them eating Tide Pods a few weeks ago, to now they're controlling the destiny of the gun control debate. You have people right now who are still enveloped themselves in the Black Lives Matter, but you have some of us out here who are trying to take that message, and that's why need to impeach is so important. That's why these events in these cities around the country are so important, because you have to take these messages and meet people where they are. For a long period of time, we have refused to meet people where they are. You know, you think you can just talk about it on TV, or you think you can just talk about it in the pulpit one Sunday, or you think you can have one fish fry or show up to one football game, and that does not work. You have to have sustained efforts in communities and go out and listen to people and meet people where they are. And see, one of the things that I like to talk about when I talk about need to impeach with my friends Carl and Howard, one of the things that we talk about is making sure we envelop this in our essence of protest, our essence of fighting back, our essence of standing up for what we believe to be is right. And yeah, I think if Cardi B wants to run for president, I would consider her. I'm a Cardi B fan. However, I do also understand that we are more of an essence than just make that money. We are a very conscious generation. We're a generation that everyone in our generation knows someone who's gay. Everyone in our generation knows someone who's Muslim. Everyone in our generation knows a dreamer. You know, we live in a very diverse, vibrant society, and we want the rest of the country to reflect that. Now, that ain't necessarily the case. And while I am making sure that I'm very critical of Starbucks and making sure that I know it wasn't just that one Starbucks, I know it's pervasive, right? Like, y'all ain't gonna trick me. I know it's pervasive, but we're also worried about the status of our democracy. And we can have those conversations, and we can take them directly to the people that matter, because whether or not you believe it or not, is the millennials and Generation Z are going to determine the future of this country in a very short order.
So I want to take a shot at this too, because to me there's something going on in American politics that's gone on that explains 16, that actually addresses this question very directly and actually addresses what Bakari is talking about, and that's this. American politics has found it impossible to talk about the truth anymore.
Correct.
When I look at the kids from Parkland, I saw a young 17-year-old girl stand up and say basically, we don't want your condolences, you blankety blank. And I was like, oh my God. Because that's exactly how I feel. She was saying, we think it's your job to protect us from getting killed. And you're taking money from the NRA and letting us die and then saying how bad you feel. Not good enough. And that's the point, I think, of American politics now. And that, to me, is part of the point about impeachment, is we have a bunch of political insiders saying this doesn't fit us, don't do this. But they don't say he's not dangerous. They don't say that he's fit for the office.
You say don't do it.
They don't say that he isn't breaking the law, that everything that Teresa said. They know that. They can read. They watch it. They watch him closer than anybody in this room, probably. They're saying it's not politically expedient for me. It's not politically expedient for me to talk about race in America and what's going on in the criminal justice system.
Correct.
It's not expedient for me to talk about sensible gun legislation. It's not expedient for me to talk about the basic issues for working Americans and the chance for young people to have to do well going forward. That's not expedient for me. What is expedient for me is a bunch of very half-baked old ideas that won't offend anyone.
Amen.
And the problem is, if you're not willing to offend somebody, then you're probably not willing to tell the truth. And that's where we are, and that's the point about both talking to millennials about their future and their chance to compete and their chance to be productive and paid well and earn enough money to have a family and live in dignity. That's where we are in the United States. People are scared to tell the truth. And until we change that, we're not going to have an effective political system.
And scared to lead.
I'm going to go to this gentleman back here who's had his hand up for a while.
Hi, I'm Steve Rush. I represent a group that's been involved in some of the very same things that you've been mentioning here tonight, and looking into holding government accountable using possibly John Adams' impeachment and debtor's levy. My question to you is, would you consider other options in which may not necessarily have Mike Pence assume office afterward?
Do you want to address that, or you want me to?
You got a lot of choices.
You'd have to run them by me. Even with the 25th Amendment, you got Mike Pence. I mean, other than an election being held, and, of course, if there was some sort of evidence that Mike Pence was somehow involved in this or had done something himself, then, of course, you would go to the Speaker of the House, whoever that might be. But you'd have
You go to Orrin first.
Yeah.
You go to Orrin Hatch first.
Yeah, and the Speaker then.
Yeah, the Speaker.
But anyway, you'd have to
then
let me
Orrin.
know what you're talking about related to the other things that would avoid the Vice President taking the position.
There's a lady here in the blue.
Thank you.
Sure.
First of all, thank you very much for being here, and appreciate everything you're doing. And I am definitely someone who's on the need to impeach train. But my question is, because I'm still confused and frustrated. My confusion is because I feel that in a way you're preaching to the choir, and we're in a red state, and this is not the only red state, I'm sure, on your tour that you've been to. Your advice to talk to our representatives and to go that route is, in my mind, and maybe I'm wrong, useless here in this environment. So I feel like and I'm listening to you and I'm hearing all of your priorities. Of course, they're very layered and complex, and again, admirable. But where is your priority in what I see as a major priority in backing progressive candidates so that we can win back some influence in this upcoming election in 2018, not even talking about 2020 yet, but 2018, and in particular, here in Atlanta, my frustration knowing that our lieutenant governor, who's running for governor, is backed by tens of millions of dollars, and we have the opportunity to possibly elect a woman, and even an African-American woman, which would be historic.
Yeah.
So,
But there is no money for these candidates.
But let's do this. Like, I agree with you, right? But I firmly believe that we can, like, this drives me crazy, because I believe that sometimes we get caught in ors, right? They say we either need to do this, or do this, or do this, or do this. And I'm an and guy, right? And so, yeah, I went to Alabama, and I took Doug Jones to Seafood Fridays at Tuskegee, right? And then we went to Alabama State, and we did all of that stuff. We ended up at a big black church in Montgomery the day before we marched and remembered Rosa Parks. And so not only do I do that, and I support Stacey Abrams, and I was in Collin County, Texas for the Collin County Democrats supporting Beto against Ted Cruz. You can do all of those things and be here and support need to impeach. Like what we need to have, in the words of the great American poet Christopher Wallace, also known as the Notorious B.I.G., is he would say that you sleep when you die, right? And right now we get caught up in the rhythmic cadence of Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech that one day we shall, and we all know that one day we shall. But we forget about the most important part of that speech, in which he talks about the fierce urgency of now. So now is that moment. And yes, you can go out and back progressive candidates and write checks, which I do way too much of, right? And you can go out and knock on doors with candidates and do all of those things. But you can also believe that your democracy is being shredded and go, and if they don't want to listen to you, I mean, that is a very, very, let me say it this way. If they choose not to listen to someone who's 18, 19, or 20 years old, do you know what people in my generation do? We sit in the office until they decide to listen to us. We go back to that office every single day until they decide to listen to us. So, I mean, there are certain ways to get people's attention, and I think that we can be a collection or a collaborative of and, because I want nothing more than there to be a female governor of Georgia. I think that Georgia deserves that. And we can do all of those things, but do not sell yourself short on having to pick a lane, because we need people running in all of the lanes, including this one.
So let me address it too, because a lot of people have said to us, why are you focused on impeachment as opposed to November 6, 2018? I think that we run the largest grassroots organization in the United States totally focused on November 6, 2018. And so all the things that people suggest we do, I'd say go on the Next Gen America website and see what we do. Because in 2016, we were on 370 college campuses. We knocked on 12.5 million doors. We registered 1.3 million people. We are, in terms of grassroots, organizing, broader democracy, getting people involved, particularly in underrepresented communities, whether you define that by ethnicity, race, income level, or age, we're in all of them. So we are absolutely committed to a broader democracy, because we believe that a broader democracy will get us a more just society, and that all the research says the more diverse and broad spread the group of people making a decision, the better the decision all the time. And we are completely committed to that, because we believe that that will be our answer. More democracy, broader democracy, more participation.
Nothing about this is exclusive. Everybody on this stage is a progressive, and we're doing all we can, and I suspect everybody in this room is doing all they can to elect progressives. So please don't mistake the fact that we're talking about one aspect of what's going wrong right now in the country is the fact that that's all we're doing.
There's a gentleman back here in the jacket with his hand up still. Yep.
Hey, my name is Dr. James Griffin, and I'm a behavior therapist in private practice, specializing in working with people who are survivors of narcissistic abuse.
Your practice must be booming.
Absolutely. And I'm aware of the organization Duty to Warn, and I remember earlier in the year that their voices were being heard. Not to say that our president is a narcissist, because I've never met the man. But I'm just wondering, how come that message has kind of been diluted recently, and how does it play into the impeachment process?
It's been diluted because the White House physician came out and said that he had conducted a cognitive test. And I think that got a lot of physicians backing down because they had somebody who had actually laid hands on the President of the United States, conducted a cognitive test. You're the physician, I am not, but I'm sure there are folks out there that would say that may not have been a complete evaluation. I don't know. And I know that there were people that were saying that. I watched the shows too. But I think that a lot of physicians back down thinking, okay, this guy's actually laid hands on him and he has rendered this professional judgment that he has just broadcast. And I would think that's where it sort of fell back.
Well, let me say this. When we did our panel with 5 psychologists and psychiatrists, they did refer to that test. Yeah. And they did give us some of the questions. And the questions were ridiculous in the sense that, can you identify, they were 3rd grade level questions, without exaggerating. That if you couldn't answer those questions, I'm not sure you could be safe walking across the street. What they said about this was, he shares the symptoms of malignant narcissism which have characterized every significant dictator in the last 100 years. And that he appears to be deteriorating. So I looked at it, I listened to that, and I thought, which has turned out to be true since I first heard this, it's not going to get any better. Whatever it is today, that's the best it'll ever be. That from now on, we have someone who has the traits that have to do all about paranoia and self-aggrandizement, and it's all about the inability to empathize with someone else, taking pleasure in bullying other people, all the traits that have characterized all the famous dictators that you grew up thinking the United States mission was to oppose them and to stand up against them.
There's a lady here in the blue.
Hi, my name is Terry Crawford, and I'm from Johns Creek, Georgia, which is in North Fulton. I'm with a group that is working for boots on the ground, the precinct building, touching people, talking to people, and I'd like to know how we can partner with your volunteers. I noticed on the website you don't have a system yet here in Georgia. Do you have volunteers here in Georgia that we can connect with? How can we help each other? Because talking to these people, talking to our neighbors, is what's going to make a difference, which is what you said. That's the only way we're going to talk to each other.
So let me say this. I completely agree with your definition of the cure, which is old-fashioned democracy, the same thing of citizens talking to each other about the most important things facing them, their families, and their communities. We're in, probably at this point, only somewhere between 11 and 13 states. We have been getting a lot of argument, encouragement to expand those states, including to Georgia, which people feel, as Bakari was saying, could be susceptible on a number of fronts to a real change, that it is a state which is on the verge of real change and needs, as someone said earlier, money, organization, all the things about being successful, that this is the first year where the Republicans are all going to have opponents. Mm-hmm, right. And that, like other states, the level of passion of people who are unhappy with this administration and the Republican rule is at a fever pitch, and therefore gives us an opportunity for a rebirth. We know that. There are people to talk about. If you're a grassroots organizer, the way we are, you don't move into new places easily because you don't want to leave ever. And so when we commit, of the states we're in, some of them we've been in from Jan 1, 2014. And we want to be in there through the cycle so that we're not the people who don't have local organization, and we're not the people who show up 2 weeks before the election and say, we're here to help, and by the way, could we have your vote?
Can I make 2 quick points real quick? We're talking about Georgia, and I want people to have, because I'm from South Carolina, so I'm staying in a mode of depression. But I hope that you all leave with a small sense of optimism, because just very politically speaking, I think there are about 13 swing states, right? You know, states that are considered purple, you know, your Colorados and all of these things. And you know how you shift states from red to blue and those type things. Well, the way that we view it and the way that many people talk about it from our perspective, and I'm not a journalist by any stretch, but in the media perspective, is that just quickly, you're going to have 2 states to swap with 2 states. And we firmly believe that Iowa is going to move to the red category and Nevada is going to move to the blue category, and that the 2 swing states that will replace them are going to be Arizona and Georgia. And so we feel as if that won't take a very long period of time to happen, but the demographic changes in Georgia are very conducive to it becoming a swing state. Now, I've heard a lot of people harp on money, which is my second quick point. But I do want you to remember that Connor Lamb got outspent by about $8 million. The Republican Party spent $11 million in that race, and Democrats spent about $3 million. So yeah, you can't win an election on prayers and good looks, or else I would be elected right now. But that was funny. Touche. But you know, that's not there are new ways in which we can win these races, and we have to make sure we're covering all the bases. The old traditional ways in which people Tom's age used to win races is not the same way we do it anymore.
It really isn't. I mean, and let me say, you had to come back on it. But let me say this, it is interesting to see what money, how people used money in 2016 and to what effect.
Correct.
I mean, one of the big questions in terms of political organizing is, what does TV do for you?
Yeah.
It's incredibly expensive.
Yeah.
It's the easiest thing to do. If the group of us wanted to run a TV ad a week from now, we could probably get together and write one together and then shoot it tomorrow and edit it in 2 days and have it up in the air. The question is, as opposed to doing the kind of organizing that you're talking about, where you have to get people to show up, train them, give them opportunities to go out and use their training, try and figure out if it's working. It's like running a business. It's not just like shooting an ad. It's like organizing a business and making sure the trains run on time and that people are organized and know what to say to whom, and kind of monitoring your progress and changing to make it better and better and better.
And in addition to the infrastructure and the money that it takes for the infrastructure and good strategy, we need great candidates. People are desperate for authenticity, for leadership, for respect, and relationship, and we don't provide that to them in a lot of candidates. They think they can raise some money, go on the air, and that's that they can get their talking points from the Democratic Party, get out there and give some rote speeches, and that's that. People really want to be heard, and I'm telling you, there are ideologues out there, certainly that are Republican conservative ideologues, and you're never going to win them over no matter how great your candidate is, no matter how much money you have. But there are a whole lot of people that are in play, particularly in Georgia, that are just hungry for leadership.
There's a gentleman right in the center here with his hand up with the black sweater on. Yeah.
Thank you. Bakari, I hear what you're saying when you talk about and rather than or. That said, there's an order in which things have to happen. We know that, you guys have acknowledged that. And if we don't flip the House and maybe get a few more Democratic senators, it's not going to happen. We're not going to impeach them. And with all respect to this movement, which I think is amazing, I do wonder about turnout and whether there's enough emphasis really being placed on that. I know you talked about it, Tom, but the Republicans, of course, know it too. And as you know, there have been a lot of reports recently about Republicans wanting to use your movement in order to rally their base. And I wonder how you react to that and whether you really feel that the emphasis in this movement is the best emphasis given what has to happen before we can impeach this guy.
Okay. So there's a couple of questions in there, and I'll try and address them all. One is how it's possible to really impeach, and the second question is what's the political impact on the midterms in particular of talking about impeachment. So in terms of the first, We are not going to successfully impeach this president without Republicans. We are not going to successfully impeach this president, as Teresa said, based on policy. This president is going to get impeached when the American people of both parties decide he is lawless and dangerous to them and their families and our country. And that's going to be the only reason. And the way that will happen is because of the events that happen every single day in the United States. It will be a series of events which we don't know what they're going to be. Did I know that Michael Cohen was keeping recordings of his conversations? No. Did we know anything of what Mueller was going to come up with? Some vague outlines, but no. Did we know that this president was going to refuse to use any of the money to protect us in terms of the 2018 elections? That Congress was going to allocate $120 million to protect us, and he wasn't going to use any of it because he doesn't want to protect our democracy? No. So then the question becomes, are we going to, people think, they're worried that talking about impeachment will turn this into a referendum on the president, and that Republicans will come out to defend the president, and therefore that we're imperiling our potential victories in November by inspiring Republicans to come out and defend their leader. To which I would say is this: it's a referendum on the president. Let's face it, November 2018 is not going to be just a referendum on this president, but to a very large extent, it's going to be a referendum on this president. And the question is not, how do we prevent Republicans from coming out and voting? That, to me, is the dead wrong question. The question is, how are we going to inspire Americans to come out and vote the right way? How are we going to get progressives to come out and vote? And let me say this. Mrs. Clinton got 12 million fewer voters than Barack Obama got in 2008. She got 8 million fewer votes than Barack Obama got in 2012. There were more Americans in 2016 than there were before. The question we should ask is, why was turnout historically incredibly terrible in 2014, as well as 16, as well as 2010? So when someone tells me, do not tell the most important truth in the United States to the American people for fear of offending Republicans, my answer is, how are you going to go to those 18 to 35-year-olds who do not believe that politicians are telling them the truth and say, this is the most important truth in America, but I'm not going to say it because politically, I think based on the poll numbers I see 7 months before the election, I'm worried it's going to offend Republican voters. I believe we're going to get turnout by telling the truth. I believe that telling the truth, the hard truths to Americans, is the way that we as a society move forward. I believe that what those Parkland students were doing was absolutely right, was to say, do your job, man. We have a serious problem. I don't really want to go 7 months more of this. When you think about the pace with which this is happening right now, it's hard to imagine this president has only been in for 15 months. It's incredible. We're talking about less than a third of the way through a 48-month term. And the fact of the matter is, it's hard to imagine the next 7 months. So I understand that argument. It's been made to me. But my question would be, rather than trying to prevent their game, why don't we play our game? That's what I've always been told is the right thing to do. Play your game, play it fast, play it aggressively, let them react to you.
I said a minute ago that people are hungry for leadership. Democrats too long have been hoping they're going to sneak past the finish line, And people want to see how you will lead and how you will govern. And this country we have, this constitutional construct we have, is beautiful. It's like a Steinway piano. And so when people come forward and say, just don't play it, Show them you can lead, show them you know how to, you understand government and you're going to hold all people to a particular standard. That's our contract. That's our constitutional contract with one another. And so I have to say, I agree with Tom on this, thinking that we're going to hold our hand, not say what's obvious, not exercise the tools of government that have been given to us is a bit of political cowardice I don't think makes people want to run up and support you.
Over here. Yes.
Thank you very much for coming down, Teresa, Tom, and Bakari. Actually, I was on The Apprentice with Donald Trump.
How'd it go?
Well, he fired me first. That's why I know he's crazy. Personal experience. So he fired me, so Tom, please fire him for me. One of the things that I thought was important was that, you know, in the 2017 or 16 election, there was a large group of people who wanted to stick their middle finger at the establishment. And so they had a white male billionaire asking them to do something for him. And there's an interesting analogy here is that Tom, as a billionaire coming before an audience of a lot of women and minorities, asking us to impeach somebody, I need you to describe in a granular way what the day after, because those guys that stuck the middle finger at the establishment, they didn't care about the day after the election. They didn't care. But you got a lot of smart people here that are interested in, well, what does America look like the day after you impeach this guy?
So let me talk about, I talked earlier about the kind of vision that I believe we should be talking about and working towards. And that actually is something that I believe has got to come forward so that we're not just talking about no. I agree with Teresa's point that impeachment is not about a policy difference. It's about lawlessness and danger and urgency. But I also think it's important to be able to say, in the future, how are we going to think about moving forward? One of the risks of impeachment, and the reason that I believe it's important to go through this process as a people of educating ourselves about what's going on with this president and in this administration, is because I started by saying this: impeaching an elected president of the United States is a very serious undertaking, because we don't want to leave the country feeling that it was political, that this was just an attempt to get somebody because we disagreed with his tax plan, or that we disagreed with his attempt to get rid of the Affordable Care Act. The fact is, Americans are going to have to together decide this president has to go, but it's not going to be 100%. What we need to strive for is actually what happened with Richard Nixon, where Republican voters and Republican electors decided, you know what, he's a liar, he's a criminal, he is a risk to our country in ways that we can see and in ways that we can't see. And it's really important that people understand that, because there's a large number of Americans, tens of millions of Americans, voted for him. And they may have voted for him holding their nose. They may have voted for him because they explicitly didn't like Mrs. Clinton. But the fact of the matter is, for this to work, that's why I keep saying it's an exercise in democracy to go to the American people, so that it's not something that's done secretly, it's not something that's done behind closed doors or by officials in Washington, D.C., that it's a popular movement, because that's the only fair democratic way to get rid of an elected president of the United States.
So I'm so sorry. We have time for one last question, and there's the lady who's been really waiting a long time in the black shirt right here. Yes. Oh, the lady behind you.
She's gonna take it.
Hi, thank you. My name is Amy Pollack. I'm here in Atlanta. Bakari, I have a question for you. I have my goddaughter is a black student, college student, love her to death. And the concern I have is, all of us are convinced, we wouldn't be here otherwise. And then we have the grassroots movement, they're settled. But how do we capture these younger people? You talk about the 18 to 35, the ones who could vote. These kids from Parkland are brilliant. What they organized on social media in 5 weeks is remarkable, to have these demonstrations and marches all over the country and all over the world. It's remarkable. So how do we talk to these younger people? How can we get them? How can we capture that audience? Because the old white people, the old black people, that's fine, we got the grassroots, but those are the future generation, and they're the ones who are going to make an impact. So the gun control is great, but how do we get them involved in this? Because it's like, Tom, you said about your son Henry, he's numb. He's numb to this, doesn't want to hear it anymore.
So, two points. The first is sometimes you have to get out the way. And that's to people in the room who want to have some level of control over our activism or what we do or when we do it or how we do it. Protest is messy. I once had an older black guy tell me one time, he said, "Why are y'all blocking the roads?" When we were protesting, Black Lives Matter was protesting a series of injustice and we were blocking highways. And I said, "Have you literally seen the poster for Selma? They blocked a bridge. How have we forgotten that protest is messy and it's uncomfortable?" So my first piece is sometimes you have to get out the way and let young people lead, right? That's fine and that's fair. And the second point, people, and this is to Tom's point earlier, people were talking about why are Parkland and why are these new generation of activists, why are they taking on the NRA, right? Oh my God, they're taking on the NRA. It's going to make sure that the NRA spends all of this money to drive out and bring more people to the polls. But what happened? Instead, just the whole image of gun control and common sense gun reform and gun rights in this change, the whole opinion of the country has changed, all because young people didn't care about what was politic. They didn't care what was the sexiest, but instead they believed in fundamentally what was right. Oh yeah, and so I tell you those things just so you understand that we want someone who is going to tell us the truth, right? And then I think the last thing, number 3, is don't be selfish in your struggle. Let me explain to you what that means. If I'm out here protesting with you for reproductive rights, which I do, I'm going to speak at Planned Parenthood's huge gathering in DC next week. If I'm out here speaking for reproductive rights, then I need you to also be on the front lines with me when there's an unarmed black man killed by police. All right? So that means I'm sitting on stage next to Tom, and I'm going to give Tom every ounce of my being to go out, because sometimes it ain't the message, it's the messenger. There are places, there are communities I can go in that Tom just can't go in. They ain't going to listen to him. All right? But I can take this message for need to impeach, and I can take it places. But that means when I have an issue, right, when I'm worried about the fact that there are 100 communities of color that have a higher lead concentration in their water than Flint, Michigan, and I pick up the phone and I call Tom Steyer, we're not talking about need to impeach. We're talking about making sure that black people and brown people have clean water. I need him to be there with me too. And so you cannot be selfish in your struggle. You have to get out the way and allow us to lead. And then you have to realize and understand that we don't necessarily care if it's politic. We're not about respectability per se. We're actually about getting the results that matter. And I think if you do those 3 things, you'll be surprised how young people come along, because we want to be a part of the change we want to see.
Can I take that too, because can I just, I want to, I guess, echo what Bakari just said. And when we think about the Parkland students, they have an incredible voice that is unique because they were in that school watching their friends get killed. And that's unique, and I agree with Bakari, you've got to get out of the way and let them speak, because that is authenticity and passion. But the other thing that we tried to do was, after that we said, after the protests are done, after the big demonstrations, we're going to commit, along with the Giffords Foundation, Gabby Giffords Foundation, and every town to register and engage high school students to vote in November. Because the voice matters a ton, and that's got to be authentic, but the organization also matters a ton. That in fact, the reason the NRA has outsized influence is because they're organized.
That's true.
And so we need to be organized in reverse. Because if you look, I always use gun control and sensible gun rights as the example of when democracy fails. 90% of Americans want sensible background checks on felons, spousal abusers, and people who are certifiably insane. We don't have them, and they're off the table, even though 90% of Americans, including more Republicans than Democrats, want them because the NRA doesn't want them. 70% of NRA members want it, but the NRA leadership doesn't want them. So when I think about what we're doing, I think exactly what Bakari said. It's a coalition. And if we don't have each other's back, then it isn't a coalition.
That's not a coalition.
And if we're not worried about justice in the criminal justice system, then we're not going to be supporting people in our coalition, and not just being nice about it, but caring about it, showing up, doing everything we can. If we're not working on immigration rights, we spend a ton of time on immigration rights in the immigration rights community and supporting lawyers and people to represent people under threat of deportation, because we believe it's a civil right and a human right. And we feel like we have to have each other's back. Full stop. I completely agree about a woman's right to choose. It can't be a throwaway. It's got to be an absolute commitment, because the way we have to win is by having each other's backs as progressives and as Americans. And that's a huge point to me. This is a president and an administration who has decided that most of the people in this country aren't full Americans and full citizens. And that is something that I find shocking and abhorrent. And as Bakari said, it ain't new. It ain't new. But the fact of the matter is we should be resisting it every single day, every single time it happens. And we should be insistent, and that should be an absolute part of supporting each other. And so that's what I was going to say. It's a coalition.
Gotta be.
That is a great note to end on. Teresa, Tom, Bakari, thank you so much for all of your comments. And thank you all for joining us.
Thank you, guys.
Please remember to grab these and take them with you. Thank you. Good night.